Before I tell you this story, I need you to promise me something, not out loud, just to yourself. Promise that if someone who has already survived something warns you not to do a thing, no matter how small, no matter how harmless it sounds, you will listen to them. You will not ask why. You will not test it just once. You will not tell yourself that rules like that are for other, more superstitious people and not for someone like you. I made that mistake. I was a police officer. I thought I had seen enough of the world to know what was real and what wasn't. I was wrong, and the price for being wrong followed me home, into my bed, into my own skin, for the better part of a year. My name is James. This is the story of the 6 months I spent as the night guard of a morgue that the rest of the city pretended didn't exist. I'm going to tell you everything, not the short version, all of it. Every warning I ignored, every sound I heard, every night I sat awake convinced I wasn't going to see morning. Because I think the details are the only way you'll understand why, even now, years later, I still check the peephole twice before I open any door after dark. Get comfortable. This is a long one. Let's begin. I won't tell you exactly what I did. Some things I still have to carry alone, and this isn't the place to set that weight down. What I will tell you is that it was the kind of mistake that doesn't just cost you a promotion. It's the kind that gets whispered about in a station long after you've left the room. Officers you've never even worked a shift with somehow know your name by the end of the week. My captain didn't fire me. I sometimes wonder if that would have been kinder. Instead, he called me into his office on a Thursday afternoon, didn't offer me a seat, and told me, without looking up from the paperwork on his desk, that I was being reassigned. "You're going to the old morgue," he said. "Night shift, starting Monday. 6 months." I actually laughed, a little, out of nerves more than anything. The old morgue wasn't even a phrase I'd heard used seriously before. It was the kind of thing older officers mentioned, the way you'd mention a haunted house on the edge of town. Half joke, half warning, never anything you actually looked into. I asked him why a morgue needed a police guard at all. He finally looked up at me. "Because it's remote, it's unsecured half the time, and because it's where we send people who need somewhere quiet to think about what they did." He let that sit for a second. "You'll report to the man currently on the post. He'll walk you through it. After that, you're on your own." I want you to understand, at the time, I thought this was simply a punishment built out of boredom and isolation. Sit in an empty building all night, alone, with nothing but paperwork and silence as a kind of psychological penance. I even thought, in a strange way, that it might be good for me. Time to think, time to be still. I had no idea what alone in that building was actually going to mean. The drive out to the old morgue took almost 40 minutes from the station, most of it along a road that got narrower and darker. The further you went, streetlights growing sparser until they disappeared completely for the last stretch. The building itself sat back from the road, low and flat and gray, more like an old warehouse than anything you'd associate with medicine or death. There was a chain-link fence around it that had rusted through in places, and a single security light over the front entrance that buzzed audibly even from the parking lot. I remember sitting in my car for a full minute before I got out, just looking at it. I told myself it was because I was tired. I know now it was something else. Some part of me, some old animal instinct, already trying to warn me before I'd even set foot inside. He was waiting for me just inside the front door when I arrived, like he'd heard my car from 100 yards away. I never learned his full name. Everyone at the station just called him the old man, and it fit him so completely that asking for anything more specific felt almost disrespectful. He was maybe in his late 60s, thin in the way that comes from decades of skipped sleep rather than any particular health, with a face that had settled into a permanent, careful watchfulness. 20 years, he told me, he'd worked this post. 20 years of nights inside that building, alone with the dead. He walked me through the basics first, the ordinary parts of the job, where the light switches were, which ones flickered and needed a firm hand. How the old boiler in the back groaned like a dying animal every night around 2 in the morning, and that this was completely normal and not something to investigate. He showed me the guard room where I'd spend most of my shift, a small space with a desk, a single lamp, and a window that looked out over the parking lot and, beyond it, the tree line. Then he showed me the storage room, the room where the bodies were kept. It was colder in there than the rest of the building, obviously, but it was a different kind of cold, a cold that seemed to sit on your skin rather than just lower the temperature around you. Steel tables, refrigerated units built into the wall, each with its own small handle and a card slot for identification. The lighting was fluorescent and slightly too bright, the kind that makes everything look flatter and further away than it actually is. Above the door leading into that room, near the top of the frame, there was a small mark. I almost missed it the first time. A symbol, hand carved into the wood, old enough that the edges had softened and darkened with age. I asked him what it was. "Never mind that for now," he said. "I'll explain it if you need it explained." I remember thinking that was a strange thing to say. I didn't push. Before he handed me the keys, an actual physical ring of keys, heavier than I expected. He stopped and he looked at me the way you look at someone when you genuinely need them to hear you, not just listen politely and move on. "I'm only going to tell you 2 things," he said, "and I need you to actually keep them, not just nod at me like you're keeping them." "Okay," I said. "First, don't open the door. It doesn't matter what you hear from outside. It doesn't matter who it sounds like, or how desperate they sound, or what kind of night it is. You do not open that door after dark unless it's me, and you already know my knock." I asked what his knock was. He told me 3 knocks, a pause, then 2 more. I remember thinking even then how strange it was that a grown man working a government job needed a secret knock to feel safe at his own post. I filed it away as an old man's eccentricity and moved on too quickly. "Second," he said, "never give anything to anyone. Nothing leaves this building in someone else's hands. Not water, not a light, not a scrap of paper. If someone asks you for something, anything at all, the answer is no, every time, with no exceptions." I told him I understood. I meant it about as much as you mean anything you're told on your first day at a job you don't respect yet, at a job you don't respect yet. He studied my face for a long moment, like he was trying to decide whether I actually understood or whether I was simply agreeing to make the conversation end. Then he sighed, handed me the keys, and told me he'd be back at sunrise. I sat alone in that guard room for the first time that night, and for the first few hours, absolutely nothing happened. I read through some old case files I'd brought with me, made a pot of bad coffee on the little burner in the corner, and by 3 in the morning I was almost bored enough to laugh at how seriously I'd taken his warnings. That feeling did not last. I want to be honest with you about something. The first few weeks were quiet, genuinely, boringly quiet, in a way that almost made the old man's rules feel like leftover superstition from a different, older generation of officers. I settled into a rhythm. I'd arrive just before dark, review paperwork, listen to the building's strange collection of groans and settling sounds, and around dawn the old man would arrive, and I'd drive home to sleep through the daylight hours like some kind of nocturnal creature slowly losing touch with a normal schedule. I started to relax. I even started to enjoy the solitude. In a way, there's a particular kind of peace in being the only living person in a building when you don't yet know what else might be sharing it with you. Looking back, I think that quiet period was almost a kindness. It gave me just enough false confidence to walk straight into what came next without the caution I should have had. It was raining the night everything changed. Not a gentle rain, a hard, relentless downpour that turned the parking lot into a sheet of moving water and drowned out every other sound in the world. I remember being grateful for it, honestly, because it gave the guard room a kind of coziness it didn't usually have. I was reading through an old case file, half listening to the storm, feeling about as safe and unremarkable as I ever had in that building. Then I heard the knock. At first, I genuinely could not place it. The building was old, full of strange acoustics, pipes that groaned, Window frames that rattled with every gust, doors that shifted slightly in their frames when the pressure changed. I told myself, quite reasonably, that it was the wind. Then it came again. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Not frantic, not panicked, deliberate, in a way that made the hair on my arms stand up before my mind had even finished processing what I was hearing. This time, there was no mistaking where it came from. The front door. I remembered the old man's warning immediately. Don't open the door, no matter what you hear. And for once, I actually listened. Instead of reaching for the handle, I picked up my flashlight and crossed the guardroom to the small reinforced peephole set into the door. What I saw on the other side is something I still see when I close my eyes on bad nights. An old woman was standing in the pouring rain, completely still, wearing a long black dress that clung to her frame from the wet. She wasn't sheltering from the storm the way any normal person would, hunched, arms crossed, moving from foot to foot. She stood perfectly upright, perfectly still, water running off her as if she'd been standing there for hours, maybe longer. She was facing the door directly, facing the peephole specifically, as though she somehow knew the exact height and angle of my eye on the other side. She did not blink, not once, the entire time I watched her. I actually counted the seconds in my head, waiting for her to blink, and she simply never did. Against every ounce of training and instinct I had, I spoke to her through the door. I asked what she wanted. "Please help me," she said. Her voice was soft, almost pleasant, completely, unsettlingly wrong for a woman standing alone in a storm at that hour, outside a building with no other houses for half a mile in any direction. I asked what her problem was. There was a pause. Not long, but long enough that I felt it in my chest. And then she said in that same calm, almost polite voice, "Could you give me a bottle of water? The water you use to wash the old bodies. I want you to sit with that request for a second the way I had to. Not, can I use your phone? Not, can I get out of the rain? A specific, deliberate request for the water used to wash corpses, spoken by a stranger standing outside an unmarked government morgue at 3 in the morning in a storm, without blinking. Something in me understood on a level below language exactly what I was looking at, even before I had the words for it. "Go away," I told her, and I heard my own voice crack on the words. "I have nothing to give you." She was silent for a long moment. Then she tilted her head very slightly and said the words that have stayed with me every single day since. "You're too young," she said. "Don't play with me." Then, without another word, she turned and began walking away, back into the sheet of rain, moving at an unhurried, almost leisurely pace, as though the storm meant nothing to her at all. I don't fully know what came over me next. I should have simply stepped back from the door and let her go. Instead, I tracked her through the small windows along the side of the building with my flashlight beam, following her progress across the lot until the darkness and the rain swallowed her whole and there was nothing left to see. I went back to my desk and did not manage another minute of sleep or work that night. I just sat there, listening, waiting for a second knock that never came. When the old man arrived at dawn, I told him everything, word for word, expecting some kind of shock or concern on his face. I got neither. He simply nodded, slowly, the way you nod when someone confirms something you already suspected, and said only, "Remember, don't give her anything." I asked him, practically demanded, to explain who she was. He told me it would keep until I'd had some sleep, and that some things were better explained in daylight with a clear head and not standing in a doorway at dawn. I went home more shaken than I wanted to admit, even to myself. I told myself over the following day that it had simply been a strange, desperate woman. Someone unwell, wandering in the storm, latching onto whatever unsettling request came into her head. I wanted so badly to believe that ordinary explanation. It would have let me sleep. That belief did not survive the following night. I was sitting at my desk, maybe an hour into my shift, when I heard my name. Not from one direction, from everywhere, from inside the walls, from the corridor leading toward the storage room, from somewhere outside the window. At the same time, it seemed to come from directly behind me. My name, spoken over and over in a voice that I almost recognized, a voice with an unsettling, imperfect resemblance to people I knew, and that I also somehow knew belonged to no one I had ever met. For one confused moment, I thought maybe another body had arrived and someone was calling for help unloading it. But that explanation collapsed almost as soon as I thought of it. Nobody calls out like that. Nobody arrives without radioing ahead first. And nobody's voice moves through a building the way that voice was moving, sourceless, everywhere, all at once. I grabbed my flashlight and left the guard room because somehow staying still in that chair felt more dangerous than moving toward whatever was happening. That's when I found the heavy interior door, the one leading into the storage room, the one directly beneath that old carved symbol the old man had told me not to worry about yet, standing wide open. And there she was. The same woman from the night before, walking calmly into the room where the bodies were kept, moving with the ease of someone who had a key or didn't need one. I shouted at her to stop. My voice echoed strangely in that cold, fluorescent-lit room, sounding smaller than I wanted it to. She turned to look at me. Her face had changed since the night before. I don't have a clean way to describe this, even now. It wasn't the same calm, almost gentle expression from the rain. Something underneath it had shifted, the way a mask shifts when the person wearing it stops trying to hold it in place. She began walking toward me, small, deliberate steps, closing the distance between us far too calmly for the situation. And then the lights went out, not flickered, not dimmed, out completely, plunging the entire room into a darkness so total I couldn't even locate the doorway I'd come through. I could hear her though, closer now than she had any right to be, given how few seconds had passed. "Please," she said, her voice right beside my ear, though I want to be clear. There was no one standing beside me when the lights came back. "Give me the water. It's just water." Then, nothing. Silence. When the lights flickered back on a moment later, the room was empty. Just steel tables and the low hum of the refrigeration units, as though nothing at all had happened. I ran back to my guard room so fast I nearly went down on the wet floor, and I sat there, shaking, watching the clock, unable to slow my breathing until the first gray light of dawn finally came through the window and the old man walked through the door. I told him everything, practically begging him to explain what this woman actually wanted from me. He sat me down, poured us both a cup of the terrible coffee I'd been making all week, and finally told me the truth. "She's a witch," he said, as plainly as if he were telling me the time. I laughed, a short, nervous laugh, the kind that comes out before your brain has decided whether something is actually funny. He didn't laugh with me, he just waited, patiently, until I stopped. "She wants something from the bodies," he continued. "The water used to wash them, hair, nail clippings, anything that came from someone who has died. She uses it in her craft. It's a very old kind of practice, and this building, because of what it's used for, has always attracted her kind." I asked how he could possibly know all this, how a police guard post had somehow become the subject of this much specific, detailed knowledge. He told me he'd learned it the same way I was learning it now, slowly and at a cost. I asked how she'd gotten through a locked door in the first place. "She doesn't work alone," he said. "She works with the dead, with whatever lingers in a place like this. That symbol above the storage room door, the one I told you not to worry about yet, that's a blessed mark. It's meant to keep her and things like her from crossing that threshold uninvited." "Then how did she get in tonight?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment before he answered. "She can only cross it if she's already been given something from the inside, even something small, even something you didn't realize you were giving her." I felt my stomach drop, thinking back over the last 2 nights, trying to remember if I had done anything, said anything, that could count. He told me to go home and rest, and that we'd talk more once I'd had some sleep. I didn't feel any better leaving that conversation than I had walking into it. If anything, I felt worse, because now I understood just enough to be afraid, without understanding enough to protect myself. When I got home that morning, I noticed it before I'd even gotten out of the car, right in front of my own front door, not the morgue's, mine, at the house I lived in, miles from that building. The dirt looked disturbed. freshly dug, then packed back down, but not carefully enough to hide what had been done. I crouched down and looked closer, and that's when I found it. I still struggle to describe this object accurately. It was something like a small, tightly bound bundle of dried straw. Haystack, almost, if that word means anything to you, with other small objects woven into it. Objects that didn't belong together. Objects that, arranged the way they were, made my stomach turn before my conscious mind had even worked out why. I didn't think. I picked it up with my bare hands, got back in my car, and drove straight to the old man's house, which I'd never even been to before that morning, but somehow found without difficulty, as though some part of me already knew the way. The moment he opened the door and saw what I was holding, he took several steps back into his own hallway. A man with 20 years of experience with the strangest things this job could offer, and in that moment, he looked genuinely, deeply afraid. "What happened?" he asked, his voice tighter than I'd heard it before. I explained. The dirt, the bundle, exactly where I'd found it. His face went pale. "Why did you open it?" he said. It wasn't really a question. "Why did you touch it? She left that there for you to walk over. If you'd simply walked through it on your way to your door, that alone would have been enough to bind something between you and her. But you didn't just walk through it. You picked it up. You held it. You touched it with your bare hands." I understood, in that moment, with a clarity that made me sick, that I had made everything significantly worse. He told me to go home, to rest if I could, to try not to think about her. I already knew, the way you know a storm is coming before the first drop falls, that not thinking about her was no longer a choice available to me. From that day forward, I was not the same person. The fever came on fast, less like an ordinary illness and more like something actively trying to burn its way out of me from somewhere underneath my skin. My joints ached in a way that made even lying still feel like an effort. There were nights during that stretch when I genuinely, calmly believed I was going to die in my bed and that no one around me would ever understand why. And then came the dreams. Every single night, the same woman. She would appear at the edge of whatever dream I was having, calm at first, almost patient, and then she would reach toward my arm. I would watch it happen as though from outside my own body, her hand closing around my forearm, her nails digging in, dragging, and I would wake up gasping. Except I wasn't simply waking from a nightmare with the memory of pain. I was waking up with the marks already there. Real, fresh, raised red lines across my skin that hadn't been there when I'd gone to sleep. I want to be clear about something because I know how this sounds. I am not a person who was inclined to believe in this sort of thing before that year. I had photographed real crime scenes. I had seen real, ordinary human cruelty up close more than once. I understood, better than most people, the difference between something imagined and something physically, verifiably present on my own arm in the morning light. These were not imagined. My captain heard I was sick and called to check on me. I couldn't exactly tell him the truth. There is no version of "I'm being hunted by a witch" I met outside a government morgue that ends with you keeping your badge or your reputation or possibly your freedom from a psychiatric hold. So I told him it was stress, just stress from the reassignment, nothing more. My mother heard I was unwell and came to stay with me for a stretch of that time. I remember her sitting in the chair beside my bed some nights, not sleeping herself, crying quietly when she thought I was asleep and couldn't hear her. I have never told her to this day what was actually happening to me during that period. I don't know if I ever will. Even the old man heard how bad things had gotten and came to check on me at the house. He sat with me and asked carefully, gently about the dreams and asked carefully, gently about the dreams. I asked how he could possibly know to ask about dreams specifically. I hadn't told anyone about them yet. That's when he told me something that made the fever heat in my body feel suddenly cold. 5 years earlier, he said, a young officer, about my age in fact, had gone through almost exactly what I was going through. The same knocking, the same voice calling his name from everywhere at once, the same fever, the same dreams, and the same marks left behind by them. I asked, my voice barely working, where that officer was now. "He died," the old man said. I remember the silence that followed, that sentence more clearly than almost anything else from that entire year. I was sitting there, feverish, marked, actively living through the same sequence of events, and the only precedent I had just been told ended in death. That is not the reassurance you want in that moment from the one person you're relying on to help you survive it. He told me the reason she kept escalating, kept returning, kept pushing harder each time was that somewhere in that old morgue, right now, lay the body of another witch, one of her own kind, recently dead, and she needed something from that body, something specific, something she hadn't yet managed to obtain, in order to keep her own power, her own craft, from dying along with it. He gave me the name and address of a cleric. It was, for the first time since the rain-soaked knock on that door, something that felt like an actual path forward instead of just another warning. I drove to see the cleric the same afternoon before I could talk myself out of it. He was an older man too, though in a very different way than the guard. Quieter, slower in his movements, with the particular stillness of someone who has spent a long life sitting with difficult things. He didn't ask me many questions when I arrived, which surprised me. I got the sense, watching his face as I stumbled through an explanation of what had been happening, that this was not the first time someone had come to him with a story like mine. He had me sit, and he opened an old, worn psalter, its cover soft and dark with age, and began reading passages aloud in a slow, steady rhythm. I won't pretend to remember the exact words. What I remember is the feeling in the room as he read, a kind of pressure easing, very gradually, like a held breath finally being let out. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could draw a full breath into my chest without something catching halfway. He didn't promise me it was over. He was very clear about that. What he told me before I left was that whatever was coming for me hadn't finished trying yet, and that the night the dead witch's body was finally laid to rest, I would need to be prepared for one last attempt. I asked what prepared meant. He told me that would depend on who was standing beside me when it happened. The old man called me not long after. The dead witch's body was going to be buried the following day, he said, which meant that tonight, this final night, she would come back one more time and try everything she had to stop it from happening. He asked me to come stand beside him. I said yes before he'd even finished the question. Whatever this was going to cost either of us, I wasn't going to let him face it alone. Not after everything he'd already carried on my behalf. Not after 20 years of doing this without anyone standing beside him at all. I arrived at the morgue as the sun was going down, and for the first time since that first rainy night, the building didn't feel entirely unfamiliar to me. It felt, strangely, like something I now understood, at least in part. We didn't have to wait long. It started small, a knock at the front door again, 3 slow and deliberate, exactly as it had the very first night. We didn't move toward it. We stood together in the guard room, and the old man began speaking quietly, steadily, words I didn't fully recognize, but that felt, somehow, load-bearing, like a structure being built around us as he spoke. Then the voice started. She used my mother's voice this time, not an approximation. Her actual voice down to the smallest inflection, the particular way she says my name when she's worried about me. It came from just outside the window, pleading, crying, asking me to please just come outside, please just help her, please. I have never in my life had to fight harder against an instinct than I did in that moment, standing perfectly still while a voice that sounded exactly like my mother's begged me to open a door. We didn't move. She tried other voices after that, people I recognized, and some I didn't, some that felt like they were reaching for memories I hadn't thought about in years, searching for whatever crack she could find in either of us. The old man kept speaking, low and steady, never raising his voice, never breaking his rhythm, no matter what came from outside. I don't know how long it went on. Time in that room had stopped meaning anything specific. At some point, deep in the darkest part of the night, the voices simply stopped. The the silence that followed was somehow louder than anything that had come before it. And then she was gone. Not gradually, not with any warning, simply completely gone, the way a held breath disappears the instant you finally let it out. The following day, they carried the dead witch's body from the storage room and buried it, quietly, without ceremony, in a plot I was never told the location of and never asked about. I stood at the edge of the property and watched the small procession from a distance, and I remember feeling, for the first time in months, something close to peace. After that, things slowly returned to something resembling normal. The fever broke completely within a week. The dreams stopped all at once, as though a switch had been thrown somewhere. The marks on my arm healed and eventually faded to nothing, though I still find myself checking that spot on quiet nights out of habit more than fear. Days passed, then months, then eventually years. My 6 months of punishment came to an end, and I was reassigned back to my regular post, back to ordinary daylight hours, back to an ordinary sleep schedule, back to the kind of problems a normal police officer is supposed to deal with. I want to tell you I never thought about that building again. That wouldn't be true. I thought about it often, especially on rainy nights, especially whenever I heard 3 slow knocks anywhere, on any door for any reason. I want to tell you the story ends there, with that quiet, gradual return to normal life. That would be the comforting version, and it's the version I told myself for a long time. But a few years later, the old man called me again. I hadn't spoken to him in a long while by then, and something in his voice, before he'd even said a single word about why he was calling, told me this wasn't a friendly catch-up. He told me the old woman had died, and that her body, at that very moment as we spoke on the phone, was lying in that same old morgue, in that same cold storage room, beneath that same carved symbol above the door. She had finally gotten what she'd spent so long trying to take from us. She had finally spent an entire night inside that building, exactly where she had always wanted to be. I asked him, after a long silence, what that meant for whoever was guarding the building now. He didn't answer that question directly. He just said quietly, "At what cost, though? To him, to that first young officer 5 years before you, to you. That's the end of it. That's everything that happened to me during those 6 months, told exactly the way I lived through it, and everything I've learned since. I still don't fully understand what that woman truly was, or what she'd already taken from the world long before I ever met her, standing there in the rain. I'm not sure I want to understand it any better than I already do. What do you think about it? If this story stayed with you the way it stayed with me, if you felt that same tightness in your chest somewhere around the 3rd or 4th knock, I want to hear about it. Tell me down in the comments. I read every single one, and I especially want to hear if any of you have your own version of a "don't open the door" rule from someone who came before you. If this is the kind of story you want more of, make sure you're subscribed and turn on notifications, because there are more old buildings, more night shifts, and more things that shouldn't be waiting behind locked doors coming very soon on this channel. Before you go, I'll leave you with the same thing the old man left me with all those years ago. If someone who has already survived something warns you not to open a door, don't open the door. Even if it's raining, even if the voice on the other side sounds exactly like someone you love.